Changing spark plugs should be a relatively straightforward, relatively easy process, and I'm not perfect, so I want to share with you some lessons that I learned from changing the spark plugs in our 2020 CX-9. Hey folks, welcome back to the channel and welcome to our 2020 Mazda CX-9. Now in this video, this is going to be our first scheduled maintenance for the car. That's right, we're doing spark plugs today, and I want to show you guys how to do it. So before we jump over to the car, let me go through all the tools and parts that we're going to need to do this job. Obviously, you're going to need your spark plugs. These are going to be the NGK Iridium part number 90288. We've got 4 of these. We're going to need our 14mm thin-walled spark plug socket. We've got a 10mm and an 8mm socket, a 1/4" drive extension, a 3/8" drive extension, and the associated ratchets for that. Also have a feeler gauge just to check the gap on the spark plugs. Now the gap on these spark plugs is supposed to be 30 thousandths, and I've already checked them, but I want to go ahead and show you. Here's the 30 thousandths feeler gauge. I would go ahead and just check all of these plugs before you put them in the car, because if they've gotten dropped or mishandled during shipping or anything like that, that could certainly close up the gap and then cause a misfire. So like I said, I've already checked all of these. They are all from the factory, 30 thousandths, so these spark plugs are good to go. And the other tool on the table that I didn't mention is my spark plug tester. Now this obviously is not needed to do this job, but I have this in the shop, so for fun we're going to test at the end of the video the spark of the 40,000 mile plugs that are in the car versus the new plugs that we're getting ready to put in the car. So now that you've got all of your tools and your parts ready, now let's jump into the engine and let me show you guys how we're going to change these plugs. The first step is to remove this engine cover, and quite simply just grab the front of the cover and lift up a little bit, go all the way around, pop this cover off, set it out of the way. Now that we've got the engine cover off, that exposes our 4 coil packs. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And below the coil packs is where you'll find the spark plugs. Now the first coil pack on the passenger side of the car is going to be easy to remove. However, the next 3 headed towards the driver's side, you'll notice this bracket is in the way. So we need to remove that bracket or loosen it so we can slide it out of the way so we can access the retainer bolts on these 3 coil packs. And to do that, you're going to need your 10 and your 8mm socket, because there are 4 bolts right on top of this bracket that we'll need to remove just to be able to slide this bracket back, again, to access the bolts for the coil packs. Alright, so I got the 4 bolts out and I was mistaken. The 4 bolts are all 8mm, so you've got 1 in the back corner, 2, 3, and then 4 right underneath this hose here. You just need to pull that hose back a little bit and you can access it. So they're all 4 8mm bolts, and you can see we've got this bracket loose enough now, and I went ahead and took the bolt, the bolt out of this coil pack. But before I remove any of the coil packs, you can see down in here in this valley, this is just a magnet for dust and dirt. So we're going to take the shop vac, and if you have access to compressed air, might not be a bad idea just to blow all that out. But I don't, or my air compressor is not hooked up right now, so we're just going to use the vacuum and blow all that dirt and debris out before we start pulling those coil packs. Alright, now that we've got all that dirt and debris blown out as best we can, we go ahead and start removing the coil packs. So again, just your 8mm bolt, or 8mm socket. Go ahead and loosen and remove the bolt holding that coil pack down. And you'll do this for all 4 of them. And these 3 over here, again, we're just going to have to move this bracket out of the way a little bit to get to those 2 bolts, but no big deal. Now you can unplug these connectors. It looks like this wiring harness has enough leeway so we don't have to unplug them, but if you have to replace these coil packs, you can simply squeeze these plugs and the connectors will come apart. So now that we've got the bolt out, I like a little magnetic tray here so we don't lose the bolts. And then this coil pack just comes right out. I've got all 4 bolts out of the coil packs, but I had to call it audible. I had to reach for my 8mm ratcheting socket, or ratcheting wrench here, because this bracket was just a little too tight to reach my socket wrench, and I just didn't want to push and pull on this thing too much. But anyway, this little ratcheting wrench did the trick. I was able to get underneath of there, get the bolt out. Now we're able to remove all 4 coil packs. Now that all the coil packs are removed, we can go ahead and remove the spark plugs. And again, to do that, I'm using my 14mm thin-walled socket on a 6-inch extension with my 3/8" drive. And probably could use another extension actually, but this will work. There we go. There's spark plug number 1, and actually doesn't look too bad. Got a nice tan color on the electrode. Again, these are only 40,000 miles, or a little under 41,000 miles, so I didn't expect too much burning, carbon deposits, or anything like that. But hopefully you can see that there. Not too bad for 40,000 miles. Now we got everything put back together. The engine cover is back on. Sorry I didn't show much of that process, but it was basically the opposite of what I showed you to remove all the plugs. And now just we need to start it up and make sure everything works. Alright, so I don't know if you could tell from that last clip, but when we did the initial startup, the engine was misfiring, so cut the engine immediately, went to troubleshooting. Now, changing spark plugs should be a relatively straightforward, relatively easy process, and I'm not perfect, so I want to share with you some lessons that I learned from changing the spark plugs in our 2020 CX-9. The first lesson was making sure that the spark plug boot, or the coil pack, was fully seated on the plug itself. My mistake was I felt like it was seated, and I kept trying to push the coil pack down a little bit more, and I felt some resistance when I was pushing the coil pack down, and that should have been my first takeaway, or my first indication that it was not right. So lesson number 1, make sure your coil packs are seated well, and they should seat easily on the spark plugs. The second lesson I learned was be very careful when you're removing and installing the coil pack retainer bolts, because the coil pack on the driver's side, again, because of that vent tubing, whatever kind of tubing it was, I think when I was removing that bolt, it came out a little bit off at an angle and kind of boogered up those threads on that nut set a little bit, but I was able to straighten that out and basically re-tap that nut set that was in the top of the engine, and I was able to get everything seated and put back together just fine. Now, as far as testing the old versus the new spark plugs, I did put the plugs in my spark plug tester, and I'll put a video up right here. And from my eye, and guys, let me know down in the comment section below, but to my eye, I did not see really any visible difference in the spark between the old versus the new plugs. That's going to do it for this video. I hope it's been helpful to you. And if you guys do need one of these 14mm sockets for your spark plugs, be sure to check out the description below. I've got an Amazon link to this exact spark plug socket. It's going to be what you need to do this job. As always, guys, thanks for stopping by the channel, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.